driving a modified Mustang should be fun, and fewer things are better than driving a centrifugally supercharged Mustang. Why? The boost, the swelling torque curve, the noise. After sampling a Vortech Heritage Supercharger on a 1991 Fox body Mustang, we knew we had to have one for our next project, a 2018 Mustang GT. There's just something about the whistle of the blower, the whoosh of the bypass valve, and the progressive shove in the backside as the boost builds when the tack needle rushes to redline. It's addictive, and that's what makes driving a Mustang with a Vortech supercharger under the hood such a good time. However, the experience isn't limited to when the right pedal is down. With Vortech's new Heritage Gears spinning the compressor wheel at a 3.6:1 ratio, the Vortech blower is a full-time addition to the driving experience. At idle and part throttle, the Vortech V3 JT trim blower whistles away, keeping the driver engaged. And at higher RPM, the included max flow race bypass valve dumps air with a satisfying whoosh that's really giggle-inducing. All that supercharger noise is supposed to be for making power, and boy does it make power. This 50-state legal Vortech supercharger kit added 190 horsepower to our essentially stock 2018 Mustang GT. The only previous modification was a Borla catback exhaust system. Pretty impressive. The Vortech system fits the 2018 to 2020 5-liter Mustang GT and features a V3 JT trim centrifugal supercharger with an air-to-air charge cooler. It's 50-state smog legal under CARB EO D213-38, but there's plenty of room to grow. As Vortech notes, the V3 JT trim supercharger is capable of up to 950 horsepower on modified applications. Our V3 JT trim compressor was fitted with a 3.6-inch drive pulley that nets 7.5 to 8.5 psi at 7,500 RPM. The supplied handheld programmer reflashes the factory PCM with a conservative Vortech calibration for 91-octane fuel. 47 pound-per-hour injectors and a MaxFlow plug-and-play fuel pump voltage booster handle fueling duties. The high-flow air-to-air charge cooler keeps inlet temps in check before feeding boost through a 98mm blow-through MAF housing. When off boost, a Vortech MaxFlow race bypass valve vents to the atmosphere. Installation is easy with Vortech's extremely detailed instruction book. Here's where we started. This 2018 Mustang GT made 484 horsepower and 420 pound-feet of torque with just a Borla catback on Boost Addict's Mustang dynamometer. Back home, we dove into the installation by disconnecting the battery and removing the strut tower brace. The bumper cover needs to come off, so we removed the top panel and the fasteners in the fender well. Some of these are released by pushing in the middle. Then we removed the bottom panel. The corners of the bumper cover are held by this bracket. We removed the nuts and then the bracket. After unplugging the marker lights, we carefully removed the bumper cover and set it aside. With the bumper cover out of the way, we continued by disconnecting the ambient air temp sensor. Then we removed the factory cold air intake assembly. We connected a piece of hose to the radiator fitting and drained the coolant. While the coolant drained, we removed the reservoir. Then we disconnected and removed the upper radiator hose. We removed the reservoir hose as well. Next, we removed the factory serpentine belt. We removed the throttle body and stuffed a rag in the opening. We removed the reservoir mount clips and cut the bosses off from the fan shroud. We also removed this nub for clearance. Next, we removed the passenger side headlight. Then we removed the 3 bolts from the timing cover noted in the instructions. This bracket houses the idler pulleys and mounts the supercharger to the engine. We pre-assembled it and installed it to the front cover with the supplied studs and hardware. We fished the supplied serpentine belt into position and reinstalled the bolts. Before installing the supercharger, we removed the bottom drain plug and replaced it with the supplied drain hose, which facilitates supercharger gear case oil changes without removing the supercharger. Then we mounted the supercharger to the bracket. Some of the supercharger mounting bolts have limited access, so a wrench and patience are necessary. We routed the supercharger belt per the instructions. To accommodate the supercharger kit plumbing, the radiator's top is tilted slightly forward. We modified the upper radiator brackets using the template and instructions provided. For clearance between the throttle body and the upper radiator hose, we removed the factory plastic collar and replaced it with the supplied worm clamp. The upper radiator hose was modified as shown and is installed backward to route around the supercharger. Next, we installed the supplied billet aluminum coolant expansion tank. The coolant bleed hoses were reconfigured using the supplied fittings. Next, we installed the throttle body spacer and the throttle body. Note the spacer includes a fitting to supply a vacuum boost signal to the Vortech MaxFlow race bypass valve. We trimmed this part of the windshield wiper reservoir to clear the supercharger discharge tubing. The harnesses need to be routed to clear the discharge tubing. Here's how ours looked. Then we prepped for installing the supplied Vortech air-to-air intercooler. We removed the bottom and top filler panels. Then we released the harness from the front bumper. We removed the radiator support braces and the side filler panels. Note that Vortech protects the intercooler core during shipping with cardboard sheets, and we kept them in place while installing the core to protect the delicate fins. We modified the radiator side shrouds as shown to keep air going through the radiator to maximize cooling efficiency. The upper radiator filler panel was also modified as shown to clear the air conditioning condenser. Our 2018 Mustang GT was equipped with adaptive cruise control, whose bracket we modified to clear the intercooler outlet. We relocated and reclocked the horns to clear the intercooler outlet tubing. Next, we tweaked these tabs with an adjustable wrench for clearance. Then we installed the discharge tubing. With the passenger's side done, we reinstalled the headlight. We transferred the factory mass airflow sensor from the factory airbox to the supplied Vortech billet aluminum 98mm blow-through housing. After pre-assembling the MAF housing and related hoses, we attached the plumbing to the throttle body. Before installing the bumper cover and assorted panels, we trimmed off this excess plastic stud from the radiator end tanks. After checking all of the hose and electrical connections, we reinstalled the front bumper cover. Next, we replaced the factory port injectors with the supplied 47 pound-per-hour fuel injectors. We used a fuel line tool to disconnect the direct injection pump. The fuel rail spacers are stubborn, but they eventually come out. Note that 2 of the injectors and their clips are installed differently than the rest. We finished up the underhood work by installing the brake booster hoses, PCV plumbing, and cold air ducting. We opted for our own air filter as our aftermarket air oil separator system interfered with the coolant reservoir and the OEM airbox location. This is just a temporary solution for testing until we find a different air oil separator system. To feed the thirstier port injectors and the direct injection system, we removed the rear interior panel to locate the fuel pump connector. The supplied Vortech MaxFlow fuel pump booster increases the voltage to the intake fuel pump system, eliminating the need for higher flow aftermarket pumps. That's pretty cool. The electrical connections are easy, just a couple of connectors and a ground wire. We refilled the cooling system with the coolant we saved from before. Before starting the engine, we loaded the all-important calibration into the Mustang engine's brain using the supplied tool. But here's a tip. To reduce downtime, follow the calibration instructions before starting the kit installation so the supplier has time to send the file before you finish. On our first startup, we checked for leaks and made sure the reservoir was full. During initial testing, we found that the factory spark plugs shown at the top here weren't up to the task for our application. The factory plugs were gapped at 44 thousandths, which was too wide for the OEM coil packs to jump the gap under boost. Instead, we installed NGK 6510 spark plugs, shown at the bottom here, which are 1 heat range colder and gapped them to 28 thousandths for reliable spark under boost. That cleared up our misfire, and we were ready to head to the dyno. The chassis dyno confirmed what our butt dyno felt. The Vortech supercharged Gen 3 Coyote was making serious steam. At a modest 8.6 psi, this 2018 Mustang GT made 674 horsepower and 539 pound-feet of torque, which is calculated at the flywheel. That's a pickup of 190 horsepower and 119 pound-feet of torque. Who can argue with a 40% increase in power? Look how the boost rate picks up after 6,000 RPM. And the Vortech V3 JT trim blower hits its stride. Using our HP Tuner software, a data log confirmed that the Mustang's PCM was content with Vortech's 50-state legal calibration. Note that the PCM's negative retard value represents additional spark advance, which can be counterintuitive. Overall, an experienced tuner might be able to add some power with ignition timing, fueling, and camshaft timing changes, but with a totally stock drivetrain, including the clutch, we're not eager to get greedy with a spicy tune-up, at least not quite yet. We couldn't be happier with how much more fun this 2018 Mustang GT is to drive. The noise is a throwback to our old Fox body days, but with the incredible power and refinement of today's S550 Mustang. While we thought the Heritage Gears might get old, they don't. We like them more and more every time we hit the starter button.